Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, depending on where you are. So let's get straight to it. So let's go on to today's particular use case. We'll be focusing on Salesforce and Zendesk. And the particular use case in question, or use cases that you might be thinking about for Salesforce and Zendesk, are the ones that you see on screen. So things like pushing across accounts from Zendesk as an organization, sorry, accounts on Salesforce, I should say, as an organization in Zendesk, cases and tickets, exchanging that information between the two, contacts as users as well. And in fact, the first three flows, as they're called on our platform, that you see there, they are actually part of our template. However, today we shall be looking at bringing in orders from Salesforce to Zendesk, which is this flow here that you see at the bottom. And what we'll do is walk you through how you actually build this from scratch on our platform. Now, when you first log into the platform, what you'll see is this dashboard. Now, in your case, very likely it'll be an empty dashboard. You won't have any integrations there unless you subscribe to any pre-built integrations. In my case, these are here just for your benefit, for you to see some of the examples that are there. However, we will not be focusing our attention on these today. As I said, we will be building our own integration today from scratch. Before doing that, allow me to provide you some insight into the platform, into what's there, so you're familiar with what you're looking at. So here on the left-hand side, you see the home screen, which is essentially what's here. You also see some tools available at your disposal. The flow builder is to build flows, essentially, which is what we will be using. The data loader is for cases where you need to bulk move information for initial loads or initial setup of data into a specific system. Imagine the case where you're onboarding a completely new application into your business, or ultimately replacing, for example, a previous one. You might want to load data into your marketing tool, into your CRM, for example, or even for that matter, into your subscription tool as well. And that's what you would use data loader for. For those more adventurous people, you have the dev playground, the developer playground here, which you can experiment with a number of different things. And I do encourage you to do so if you have the inclination. In terms of resources, these are building blocks. These are the actual artifacts that you will be working with. And walking through from top to bottom, we have connections there. So that's where you're telling our platform, by filling in a form, how we should talk this to the specific system. So for example, in this case, we're connecting to Salesforce. So I will be providing credential information. The same thing for Zendesk as well. Then we have imports and exports. Now, this is where a lot of the action happens. And as the name suggests, these are used for importing information into specific systems and exporting information as well. And that's really what you can build in order to do that. They're a part of the flows themselves. And I should mention at this point that these are actually reusable artifacts. They're reusable components. So once you've built them, you can use them in different integrations in different places. Again, for those who are adventurous at heart, and perhaps those who like to drink Red Bull and get some wings, as it was back in the day, you can, of course, have and use JavaScript scripts within our platform. So, for example, if you want to do some very advanced functionality and have full control of the data that's flowing through the platform, you can build and write your own scripts and hook them into specific places within the flows themselves. And then, of course, you have some other more advanced functionality there, which we shall leave for another session. Next up, as should be expected, is the help section. Now, within the help section here, you have the help center itself, which is a article. It's a not an article. It's a article housing. It's a location where you can find a number of different articles written by ourselves. It's a knowledge base essentially, and also by our some of our partners as well, and inclusive some comments from customers as well, which is always useful. Next up is the what's new. So you can see the release notes and see what new features have been released recently, as well as over the last few months and potentially even years as well. It gives you a good view of how our platform has evolved. Last but not least, as part of the help section, is the submission of tickets. So if you do have any specific issues on the platform, either technical or otherwise, and you do require some assistance, by all means, submit a ticket straight from within the platform. Now, if this is your first time on the platform, then we do advise you to go to the Celigo University. And as the name would suggest, you do get certified in what you actually do there. So there is a learning path, actually a number of learning paths that you can go on to get more familiar with the platform, better acquainted with the functionality, even though we will cover quite a bit today. But I do encourage you, as I said, to go through there, to go through the learning path. It is free to go through it. And it does give you a good understanding of not only how Celigo works, but also how integrations work in general. Puts you in the right mindset, if we can say that way. And last but not least, here is a marketplace. Now here in the marketplace, you will find the pre-built integrations that I shared before. So this is where these are the shelves which you can browse and see what our company offers. And you can also see templates as well. So for example, if I go here and I type Salesforce, I can see all the pre-built integrations, the integration apps, but also the templates themselves. And you can in fact install and use them in your account. Okay. And now I will leave this for another time. We are, in the end here, the aim is to show you how to build an integration from scratch, from the beginning. So the first thing you'll want to do is collapse this here so we can actually have a full view of things. Step one is creating an integration. Here is essentially creating a tile, one of these tiles that we see here. And I'm going to call this build a flow. I'll call it software here. Okay, we'll save that. And what will happen is this is essentially creating one of these tiles here, and we'll move straight onto here. Now we can create a flow. Now, creation of a flow is where a lot of it actually happens, as I mentioned before. Upon clicking on Create Flow, what you'll see is this canvas. Think of it as a painting canvas, an empty canvas where you can start being artistic, let's say, right? And the first thing you want to do is actually create an export of information, to extract information out of your source system. Step two will be to actually create an import to push data into your target system. And then last but not least, you have to create a mapping so that our platform knows how to translate the information between the two systems. And we're going to go ahead and do that. So in this case, I select there, adding a source. Now you'll see here at this point, you can select any number of 150 plus applications that we already have pre-built connectors for, as well as generic ones. So you can use things like HTTP generic connector, as well as FTP, for example, for the more legacy systems, and of course, databases as well. Now, if you go down the list, you'll see quite a few applications that we, or systems, SaaS software as a service applications that we have pre-built connectors for and that you can use. Now, of course, if you do not want to browse, you can type ahead, which is what I'm doing in this case. Now, in this case here for Salesforce, you have the option of providing an export or a listener. Now, this is very important for those for those who are familiar with Salesforce will know exactly what this is. For those who are not, this is very, very useful because you then have a real-time integration. As soon as something happens on Salesforce, then the integration gets triggered, and we'll show you how you actually configure that today. So we'll select here the real-time option, and then you select your connection. Now, of course, in this case, I do already have a connection created, but I will show you what the form looks like in order to create an actual connection to Salesforce in this case. But nonetheless, for any other ones, it's very similar. In this case, you select for Salesforce the actual account type, whether it's production or sandbox, and then the authentication mechanism which you'd like to use. And that's pretty much it. Once you've selected that, you put the username and then save and authorize the actual account. Now, as I said, I've already created that in the interest of time, so I'll move ahead and use the connection pre-existing. If I continue on, now I will be creating what's known as a listener. Now, even though this has a different name, it is still an export. It's still extracting information from Salesforce, albeit in a real-time fashion. Now, for those who are familiar with Salesforce, you will see and recognize what this is, especially if you're familiar with more admin side of things. If you are not, then fret not, because there's no problem here. You will be able to easily understand how to use this, as Salesforce themselves are very, very good with their documentation. It's easy to understand what you actually do with a trigger. Now, the first step is selecting an actual object type. Now, in this case, I want to extract orders. If you remember from the diagram, it is the orders that I'm interested in. So I type ahead orders, and let's see here we have a number of them. So order, just a plain order is what I'm looking for. Now, once I've done that, I can then copy this trigger. As you'll see here, this now says order. I can copy this and put it into Salesforce. For the purposes of this example, I shall skip that, as the aim is really to focus on our platform, not necessarily on Salesforce. And then there's some referenced fields. So for example, the order might have associated to it, it will definitely have, in fact, an account and also a contract, for example. Now I might want to get that particular information. So how do I do that? By going into here and selecting, for example, account ID, which is the link between an order and an account, it's typically the account ID. And then the referenced fields, by clicking this plus sign, I actually get a list of all the available fields for that specific for this specific connection. So account name and account number is very likely ones which I will be interested in getting, and also very likely a few others. If we look down the list here, let's see if we can find a few others which might be of interest to us. Let's see if we can see anything. For now, we might just leave it at that. And I'll show you one other thing that you can also do as well. So apart from actually selecting this, you can also, if we save this, you can also type them into here as well. So for example, as long as you know what to reference, you can do this as well, like so. And because I've used this quite a number of times already, I already know what to look for. And again, for those who are familiar with the way in which Salesforce works, you can also get related lists. This is very, very useful for those who might have custom objects. So for example, if you're using a different object other than the opportunities or the items or the opportunity or the products themselves, if you have a custom one for whatever reason, then this is where you would access that in relation to the order, as long as it's a child of the order. And of course, you can do the same for opportunities as well. But now we're getting to very, very technical in terms of Salesforce, so I will kick it back a little bit, let's say, and show you a bit more about the platform itself. Now, one other thing you can do, and again, very useful for scenarios like this in real time, is to be able to define a criteria, because perhaps not every single order might be of interest. So what I can do here is filter on any of the fields of the order itself, the ID, any contract ID, any other information of that nature. If I want to filter on that, I can do. So for example, I might say that the status category might be activated, for example, rather than in draft. So I'll go ahead and save and close that. Is that actually the case I want to have here? Now, if I go ahead and hit preview, you'll see that immediately I actually get some data straight away. I can see the information in there, and I can see that there is a number of Celigo also fields in there, because this is a Salesforce account which I have done a few changes on for myself from other scenarios, but nonetheless, you can see immediately there data, and you don't necessarily have to have that in your case as well. And that's it from a listener perspective. Remember, as I said before, for those of you using Salesforce, you will be able to copy this trigger and just paste it into Salesforce. But once that's done, then you have essentially created a real-time connection. Now, if we save and close this, we allow the platform to do what it needs to do in the back end. Oh, I forgot to put a name. This is very, very relevant. So here, let's call this listen for orders. There we go. We'll save and close that. And there we are. So now we've done step one of the creation of the flow, which is essentially defining the listener. Now we're going to go over to the other side of things, which is the Zendesk side. So being able to push data into Zendesk. Now, in this particular case, what we're going to do is actually create two parts to it. We're going to create an organization as well as a support ticket. Now, you might be thinking, well, why do we want to do that? Well, think of it this way. If you've placed an order, if you're a software company, you've placed your sales teams have an order, they've essentially created a new contract, things are moving along smoothly. Now you want to move that information across over to your onboarding team to activate a license, for example, or to make any modifications to a license. Then again, that's where it's useful to first verify or create the organization on the Zendesk side prior to actually creating the ticket, which is what we're actually going to do. So again, very similar to before, we select Zendesk, and we do have support for both the CRM as well as the support, and that's what we're going to look at today. Now here you'll see also two options, import and lookup. We're interested in the import for today, but to give you full visibility, lookup is for the cases where you need to get data as well. So imagine here I wanted to get more information from Salesforce before actually pushing to Zendesk. I'd be able to do that as long as I had selected Salesforce there. I'd be able to do that specific operation. Now, as I said, I'm interested in imports, so that's what we're going to select. And again, similar to the Salesforce side, I do already have a connection built, but I will show you what the form looks like, just so you have, again, full visibility of how things work. Very similar from the Salesforce perspective, you select the authentication as well as your subdomain. This is specific to Zendesk, a username and a password, and then you can, of course, test the connection and save and close, and there you have it. In the interest of time, as I said, I will select the pre-existing one and move forward. Now again, here it is now allowing me to create an actual import, and you'll see, oh, now the specific connection is offline. And here is a good opportunity to show you the feedback that you immediately get on the platform. So if for some reason the connection is not as expected, the platform will tell you, and you have the option to then go and fix it. Now, in the interest of time, I will leave it at that, but that does give you the opportunity to show you immediately how interactive the platform actually is. Now, in this case here, let's go ahead and create an organization. And what I will do again down here is selecting an API name. Now this context, if you are a bit confused, it's pretty much what Zendesk will offer on their documentation. And even if you're not technical at all, you can still understand what's happening here. So if we're trying to create an organization, well, it's very likely we'll have an API called organization. And that is in fact the case. Here we go, organization itself. That's the API, so that's the context itself. What operation are we trying to do? Well, we're trying to create an organization. So there will very likely be a create, and there is. So there's a create and a create and update. For the interest, or rather, to keep things simple for now, I will simply use create in another instance, or even if you'd prefer, you can in fact use create or update. Now, last but not least, all I have to do there is save and close. Now this import is there, but at the moment it wouldn't do much because there is a missing link, which is the mapping. We need to actually map the data between these two systems. So this is where we can actually select here this mapping icon. And we can now start mapping fields. But how does it actually work? Well, you select here and you see the drop down, the list, or in the drop down rather, you see the list of all the fields available, in this case from Salesforce, and these fields are relevant to an order. Now in this case, I shall select, for example, an account name to an organization name. And again, you see the drop down on the Zendesk side, so very interactive in that sense. Account number, let's go with external ID. And you can map any number of other things as well. But for now, again, to keep it simple, I'll leave it at that. And these are simple mappings that we've created. You can create more elaborate things, which I will show in a moment. Now, once that is done, we still haven't created the ticket. So the support staff still don't see anything. Nothing is there. Now, what we can do is add another step. And now what we're doing is creating an orchestrated flow. And this means a flow that has multiple steps. So in this case, again, we're going to select Zendesk. Yet again, it's going to be importing data. And again, I will use my existing connection, even though it is offline for the moment. And I will do here the same as before, giving this a nice name. So create ticket. And ZD is Zendesk, in case you hadn't guessed from before. It's just my own naming convention, but you can, of course, choose whichever one most suits you. Same as before, we're going to select tickets in this case, and you can type ahead. There we are. We can go to tickets. And then into the operation, which is, again, you have the create or update, delete, and update just singularly. For now, I will select the create, but you can, of course, select the create or update as well. Saving and closing this will actually add a step here, as you can see. And if I needed to, I would be able to drag this if I needed to, drag it to before, but I have placed it already in the right place. Now, similar to when I was creating the organization here in this step, I also have to add a mapping in this as well. And again, just as before, drop down is available for you, so you can in fact choose which options you'd like to use. And what I will do, actually, I had forgotten one little step here, but let me continue this and we'll see if anyone has guessed what it is that might be missing. So in order to create a ticket, I do need a few things here. So I know that I need an organization ID. I will also need a subject, a description, an external ID, very, very useful. And when is this ticket due? That's very useful. Teams tend to really like to have this. But where do I get all this data? Well, let's go from the bottom up. So here, if I type, for example, start date, well, I've got the contract start date. There we go. That would be useful. What about external ID? Well, maybe something like the contract number. There we go. So I can use that. Here, something as simple as the description, which is on the order, can be quite useful for this particular case. But then for the subject, there is a specific naming convention, for example, that you're using. Well, what about adding a mixture of fields? And that is definitely possible. So what you can do, the multi-field option here, let's say the naming convention is license provisioning for, and the specific account number, but how, or account name rather. How do I know what the account name actually is? Well, if I select this field here, I can click here and this will automatically populate the variable or the field which holds the account name. And there you go. Now we're already creating something with some hard-coded information on the subject of the ticket itself, and then as well as some variable information, which is the account name itself. It really is that easy to be able to do this. Now, last but not least is the actual organization ID. Now, I have not got this information because I didn't save from the previous step. So how does it actually work? Well, for now, I shall put here these quotes just for the interest of keeping things as is. And I'm going to go back to my previous step and obtain that actual ID. Now, if we save and close this, in this particular step, after importing the data into Zendesk, in other words, after creating the organization, what I can actually do is add a response mapping. So Zendesk will give me the ID of the organization, assuming it was successfully created. And I can then take that ID and use it in the next step. Now, I will use this naming convention, but again, you can use any which is relevant to your specific organization or whichever one suits you best. Now, if I take this, I save and close that, I can go back into this mapping and in fact, add in here the missing step. And you'll see, in fact, if I take this away and I start typing ZD, you'll see that actually shows up here already. So there I can have a mapping, and you'll notice now how you can daisy chain, if we can call it that way, the different steps in order to automate how a business process would work of creating an organization, creating a ticket subsequently within Zendesk. Okay. Now that that is done, the only thing remaining would be to actually start the flow itself, or switch it on as it will. Now, I will give it a more meaningful name. So let's call this Salesforce Order to Zendesk Tickets, and also add only because we have not covered the updates in this particular case. So once we switch this on or enable it, then the flow is actually ready. Now, remember, this is a real-time flow. So this would only work if I were to go into Salesforce and make a specific change or create an order. In that case, this would then execute. If it were a non-real-time order, in other words, a scheduled order, a scheduled flow, apologies, then I'd be able to execute the flow as you see here in this little play button. However, in the interest of giving you more information, I will show you later on what that looks like as well. But nonetheless, let me walk you through a few important aspects prior to showing you how that works. So once you've built this here, what you also have access to down here is a dashboard. This dashboard shows you every single execution of this flow. So you can see when errors occurred, what is the success of each step, how long it took as well, and how many records were processed as well. You can also see which connections are associated, and you'll see that if I hover above Salesforce, it is showing me that also here. And if I do the same thing for Zendesk, it also tells me where it's being used, and it currently is offline. So if I wanted to fix that, I can do that straight from here, edit the connection, and verify whatever issue is having or is in place, whatever the error actually is. You can also, for those who are more adventurous, as I mentioned before, you can execute JavaScript. You can hook rather JavaScript into specific places, and this is how you do that. You essentially select JavaScript here, the hook, and you create a script if you haven't got one already, or you select one which is pre-existing and you execute the function itself. And there's a number of different options that you have there at your disposal as well. If we go into there, you will see here that we have specific functions. Some of them are already done for you as what's known as a stub. It gives you a skeleton function which you can use. Others you can simply create from scratch if you're adventurous enough, and of course if you do understand how to use JavaScript. If I cancel out from this and we take a step back here to show you just a few more aspects of what we see here, you'll notice here where it says schedule, this is actually real time. As I mentioned before, this is a real time flow, so it requires something happening on Salesforce. That's known as an event-based flow, for example. But in this case, if I needed to go to Salesforce to make a change, that's what would happen for this flow to actually execute. In terms of the entire integration, so suppose I had several flows here, then I could actually see that from the dashboard, and this dashboard will show me every single execution. And in fact, now is a good time to jump over to my sandbox to show you what that actually looks like. So again, here, pretty much the same thing. If I go into my dashboard, then here is where I can see actual executions. I did this from before in order to give you visibility of what that looks like. As you can see, each step is shown within actual flow itself, or each step of the flow, I should say, is shown within here within the dashboard. You can drill also into the specific step and see what the error was in this case. Of course, reading the description, we can see that there is a missing mapping, and we can of course see the retry data as well, particularly useful in the event of debugging functional errors rather than technical ones. Now, if we cancel out from this and close that, we can then go on to a few other very equally important aspects, which are the following. So you can monitor this dashboard if you like, but it's very likely that you've got more important things to do or more valuable things to do. So how do you get notified in the event of an error? Well, this is where the notifications element comes into play. So you can actually select any of these flows that you have, or potentially all of them. And what the platform will do is, in the event that something does go wrong in any of those flows, the platform sends you an email to say, there's been an error, here's the description of the error, here's a link to the actual platform itself. The same thing would happen for offline as well. So in the previous example, what I was setting up, the system, Zendesk, for example, is actually offline. So in that particular case, then I would get an email to say that Zendesk is actually offline. Now, last but not least, if you do have several people having access to your Celigo account, you can, of course, then have an audit log to see changes. And it's very, very useful because in some instances, if somebody's made a change to a connection detail or to a specific flow and it no longer works, it is quite useful to have the audit log here to see that and potentially revert that change as well. And there you have it. That is pretty much how you create a flow from scratch. Now, so just as a recap, what we have seen is the building of a flow from an order in Salesforce, pushing that over to a ticket in Zendesk. And as I mentioned before, even though this was the use case for today, there are templates available for you to speed it up as well, the integrations that you might have within your organization. Now, from here, where do you actually go? Where do you get started? If this is your first time, how do you actually do it? Well, here it is. The first step would be to sign up for a free edition of our Celigo platform. You go straight onto the website. You'll see a very large orange button that you can press and immediately subscribe and sign up for a free account. You can build your first flow if it is your first time. If it's not your first time, welcome back. Please go ahead and build some more flows and let us know how you how that goes. As I mentioned before, I do encourage you to go through the Celigo University and the learning paths available there. It really does help to understand these artifacts and these components in greater detail to leverage them to the best of their capabilities and also of your capabilities and your understanding. Now, once you've signed up for a free edition, what else can you do? Where would you go from there? Well, what you can do is straight from within the platform is sign up for also a 30-day, not a 3-day, a 30-day trial. Now, the difference between the two, the free edition and the trial, is that with the free edition, you can build as many flows as you like. However, only one can be active at any given point in time. With a 30-day trial, that limitation gets lifted for the 30 days. What this means is you can potentially build automations for your business and experiment and see how that goes for 30 days, having access to things like the templates and of course connecting several applications as well.